Well, I can't believe we ran out of time on that last one, and with the edit that was gone in, this has to turn into a two-parter. So here we're seeing that there's the Virgin Mary that's right there, and there's the infant king in the manger. But then also, right there in the sky is Taurus the bull, and right there in the sky is Aries the lamb. And so you wonder where all the animals came from, this idea that's there. And it's actually because they're right there in the sky. In fact, that angel is there also that they talked about, and other things too, like the little drummer boy and so on, but we won't go that deep into it here. I'm just trying to show you the pieces of the puzzle that let you know that this is how it began, right here. So here's your connections here, but it even gets deeper than that. Whenever you look at this, you see somebody standing up out of Virgo's head, and this is a pregnancy goddess known as Eru in ancient Sumerian, where they use this from. And her name Eru means pregnant. So if you want to try to pull off this idea that there's a pregnant virgin who ends up having a king child and lies him in a manger, it's right there. It gets deeper though, it goes further, but it's that idea, the pregnant idea. And Matthew and Luke's nativity narratives can be based on tableau embedded in pre-Christian Babylonian and Greek constellations. Is that true? Well, yes, you can still easily see it today. You can go outside and see this whole manger story. If you know the constellations, there's Taurus, there's Aries, there's the animals that were there. Here's the Virgin Mary, and she kind of looks like she's laying down, and she's going to have an infant child. But that infant child is swaddled and lying down in the manger. And where is that? Well, it's just right there in the stars too, right there in the sky. You can see it to this day. If you want to, you can get up on Christmas morning and just at the earliest, right before the sun comes up on Christmas Day, and go outside and look, and you can actually see this whole narrative right in front of you. And you wonder where this all came from. Well, this whole narrative was written in the stars using Lamashi, which is constellation writing. It's taking constellations, and by going around the zodiac as you're doing it, you can make stories out of it. This is how many of the stories of the ancients were written down. Hard to believe that over this time we haven't had enough people notice this fact, but whenever we take and apply it to the idea of this Bethlehem star, child, all this that goes along with the idea of Christmas, it's just right there. It's easy to see. It's so easy to see, it makes you wonder how somebody got away with it for over 2,000 years and nobody understood it at all. Matthew and Luke's discordant accounts of Jesus' birth can be traced to two historic verification systems calculating the ancient world of evangelists. Kataristimos is placing things among the stars, and that's also where catastrophe comes from. I'd like to mention that catastrophe has astrophe in the middle of that, and it has to do with stars. You see, because constellations and things like that were impending signs of doom or things to come and things along that nature at the time. So pictures in the constellations framed by momentous scenes from history. Constellations are the historic pictographic book. Right here you can see it. It's written for all to see for all time. And that's where we get that actual birth narrative. But let me go one step a little bit deeper on this and show you its connections. You place things among the stars, and you can see here there's Andromeda, Perseus carrying Medusa's head, Cassiopeia just below them here. And then of course we have Pegasus, which can also be a donkey too, by the way. And we find Aries that's there too, but then there's also a sea monster that's hooked up to this, and this is showing you the story of Perseus. So So if we can see it there, can we see it in other places? Because the Greeks took this to another level and did it with their stories too. Just like the idea of Orion was killed by a scorpion, a giant scorpion, and we now know that there was no such thing as a giant scorpion, but where do you find it at? Well, a lot of people look at Hercules and Samson and these ideas showing here their 12 labors, hooking up to the 12 months, the 12 disciples, all of these 12 hookups. And it actually shows you that they were doing this a long time before. How much before? Well, in the very first of Sumerian writings, this stuff was already evident. You can see Orion here leaving a ship, going on, waving at the people on that ship, and going up. And that Milky Way ends up being a procession of anthropomorphic animals that start to get very sea-oriented, although they're trapped in this giant sea that travels in the Milky Way here. And in that river Eridanus, if you would, and the showing of the Tigris and Euphrates that they show here, they show the twin fish of Pisces, the water god Aquarius, who is Enki, also is Yahweh and a few others. There's a dolphin, there's a goat fish, there's the southern fish. There's all kinds of things attached to it. But here shows Orion walking on water. And I'd like to mention at this time that this is also the same exact depiction where they saw Jesus walking on water and they wrote about it. There's the ship and so on. That ship is also the ark, but in other cases it's actually the ancient Greek ship, the Argos and so on like that. I showed about in that. But taking these word conflagrations here in different ways, like grabbing a thesaurus, and this is in the constellation thesaurus that they have today, so you can find this information easy. Orion was known as Dingir Damu, or Mulsukal. Damu means sun. Dingir is the god of something, and Sukal actually correlates to anointed one, which is equal to Christ. So here's another catching right there in its thesaurus words and conflagration of words that you can get this exact story. And this is taken way back. S.R. Haddon actually said that he was using Lamashu writing, which is constellation writing. And this must have horrified the Babylonian priest whenever it was their little secret on how they know about history and all these things here, because it's all written in the stars and it's all based onto their ideas. And all it takes is a few conflagrations of words and you can develop many stories. And yes, many stories that were true were applied onto the stars in this manner, but many stories that we have no idea of come from this, where it's written in the stars, and they I don't know when this is, but this happened because it says it. A Mesopotamian astrologer's job was to read the encrypted messages in the heavenly writing for signs of impending earthly events that could be avoided or exploited. By the way, we can say this goes as simple as like eclipses and things like that, but when comets came by, there were impending omens and so on like that. And so this is heavenly writing or constellation. And this is from ancient Sumerians too. You can pause and read this. I'll go on past it. But these ideas that they use end up taking the picture story that's there, where I could take and just hand you a box of this writing, or it's right here, and a box of pictograms that are based off of the zodiacs, and tell you to make up a story. And you'd easily be able to make up the story. These puns are found all over the Bible though, where they say that Peter is the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. This is a pun done to equate this idea and how the church even got started. So this is over and over again seen, but it's hidden words and it's secrets of the gods. So it was really kept separate to where you don't understand these things. Like Jesus said, I'm talking to them in parables, they don't understand and all this stuff. Well, if nobody knows the magic trick that he's showing here, no one's ever going to get the answer, are they? It's strange in the story, Jesus acts like Well, I don't want them to know it. If they knew all of this, then they would know too much. So Sumerian logograms show you a lot of this connection, and then of course with the ancient Assyrians and so on that connect to this. An, the famous god, with skies and heavens, and Dingir, which shows Ilu, or the god. This is where we get Ilu from. This is where, on a comprehension of words, we get El from, of the Bibel and the Tempel, the god over the angels. Every one of those angels has an L at the end of their name too. And I've done other videos that show you that this was the god of the patriarchs. And then they did this flip thing and changed it to Yahweh. Yahweh ends up coming up as a Marduk type character where there is a total pantheon, but he comes the major one. And then you start saying he's the only one, and connections like that, and leaves the others behind, and then all the others become angels and little helpers. And he's the major deity. So it's not like we can say, well, this is something that showed up and you're like, what? No, this happened every time they took a major pantheon and they turned somebody as a leader, as far as Zeus, the lightning god, or storm god. They did same thing to Enlil in the ancient Sumerians, because Enki used to be the god of everything, and he got relegated to gods of the water like Neptune or Poseidon and so on there. But this idea of An and heavens, it's actually a star, showing you that the gods of the ancient Sumerians were hooked up to stars. And of course we can configurate that and say, oh, it's hooked up to ancient aliens and everything. But Dingir is represented by the image of a star, showing you that the gods were hooked up to stars. Well, we know nowadays, Mars is there, Jupiter and Saturn and so on like that. Well, those are wandering stars. That's what planet means, because they're not just stationary like all the others, like the dots in the picture. They're actually moving and changing. And so this must be the gods that are controlling it. And they're almost like in an old Ouija board, going around and showing you and going through constellations to where you can make up words of it. And then there's a retrogression of a planet where it goes and it stops and it goes back and it stops and it goes forward again and rings around things and so on too. And that shows you that connections. And there's a lot of different words that hook up to this, such as skies, heaven, mind, barley, ear, impaling, taboo, God, so on and on. On can be used as that. And it's looked at as a homophone. So this is other words. It's like basically like a thesaurus and so on. And so painting with the homophones, you can see that mul, in its states that are shown over here to the left, can be many, many different things. You could pause and look at this and see how mul 1 would mean 1, mul 2, mul 3, mul 4, mul 5, and so on. They even have a mul X that has to hook up with cows and so on, and water courses. So you wonder how the heavens were supposedly coursed with water, and we call it the Milky Way. That has to be some kind of liquid that's still hooked up to it. Mul is a star god, shining brightly, an inscription writing an arrow, foundation, ornament, pierce, wood, wasp. Water course, distant time, fruit, feeling, elated, field, cow, moon, and month are all designated by Mul. Mul Dingir is that star of the crossing, related as Nibiru, and of course through Sitchin's work and so on, everybody thinks that it's this and it's that and the other, but they were just actually watching stars move and declinate to different areas. And while they're watching him do so, they were saying that he was crossing over here, crossing over there, the planets of the crossing. So going back to this, if I can here, you can see there's many conflagrations of where you can get this at. And so you can make up stories out of these ideas. And the god Nibiru, or his star, in the size up here, they cause to form, this causes this to happen, and so on. And so that's just a primer. That's starting for a story that we can, just using these ideograms, change things around to a different story. and a different story, and a different story. And this is all done by hostage astrologers. Homer, who is all famous about the Greeks, was known as being a Sumerian hostage. Daniel was a hostage also, but he became the greatest of astronomers, didn't he? Crazy that we now know that Daniel was all a forgery much, much later than what was said there, and it was to try to hook things up together, but I guess that's for another video. The same thing happened with these magi, and did you know that Jesus was looked at as being a magician? This far right picture here shows that he's using a wand, raising someone from the dead who's been mummified apparently here. So these stories come from astronomy, and whenever I talked about years ago it being hooked up to a lot of archaeoastronomy, this was one of the things that it was hard for me to leave alone for a couple of years until we get to the point where I could talk about it. And amazingly, John McHugh, who I'm using some of these pictures from, has shown a connection to this and done writing about it. John, I have to mention, is somebody that was adopted by an extremely religious family, and in his youth he was just burned into him all these ideas. But he himself talks about how he kind of saw through the BS at a certain point whenever he was younger, because these two stories that are supposed to be about the same thing are not the same at all. They read the Jesus' birth narrative from this one and that one, and it's totally different. This one's supposed to be in a manger, this one's supposed to be at his house, this one's supposed to be, and of course, a lot of years later, they say, oh, well, that was years later because this, that, and the other, and try to complicate and make it all out to where it works out, but it doesn't really. In fact, it's just enough BS to go, oh, it's magic, and everybody, oh, that's what it is, and left it alone. But the truth and the reality of here is the fact that the Virgin Mary is Virgo. It also means furrow. And then she's turned into the Virgin that's here in the same story about a pregnant goddess. And so just using these pictures here, you can get this Virgin was pregnant and so on. But even her name, Miriam. See, Mir was a sign of bitter. And the Sumerians called the ocean, the salt sea, a bitter sea, and a sweet sea. Now Yam was the sea, and in fact in your Bible, the God defeated Yam, like he went out and whooped the ocean's butt. Well, in the story, it hooks up to sea creatures, Leviathan and all that. And we know there are whales and things that are connected to that, but in actuality, they're looking up in the sky and seeing these stories that are there. And Miriam becomes bitter sea. So they actually knew what this woman's name was and so on. She was the virgin, she was pregnant, she had a kid, she ended up having to go, there was no room at the inn. All these little concepts come from this same conflagration of words and ideas, and really like a thesaurus, as I said before, in figuring out things, and to the point that you can get this is a child king born by a virgin in the natives. And Nativities is Christos and the anointed one. And then you look at this picture here where it shows these animals like donkeys and Taurus the bull and so on. And that's right there in the sky too. It's the reason the animals are there. So Sharu means king or anointed one, the Christ child and king. And of course, Leo is known as the king because of such situations as this. And yes, there were lions in the ancient known world, not just deep in Africa. That's just the only place they're left now because so much civilization has taken over. It's ran out of their habitat. But when these people are still hunter-gatherers and so on, they're still surrounded by lions and stuff. They haven't been able to clear their local place. So this holy wind impregnating a virgin is in that same idea. There's the child wrapped in swaddling clothes, a child begotten by the holy wind. So this whole story can be shown as right here in front of you. And again, you can see this in the sky at night. And it's an incredible thing. People for generations after generations have said, what is this? Is this a comet that they saw? Is it this that they saw? Is it that they saw? Was it an alien came down and put a tractor beam on top of the house and everybody knew? Whenever other people were in the courtyard and all surrounding would have never noticed this and nobody ever reported it at all? Well, it's because it's a secret of these astrologers, and it wasn't happening right there on Earth. It's happening in the stars, proving it. So this is the idea. In fact, Father Joseph is actually there, Regulus. He's still there. Did you know that she had a handmaiden that was there in the earliest of tales? And then here's that handmaiden that's right up here. She's the goddess of pregnancy, so she's the handmaiden. It all works out together. So that story that we've always heard about this child, that he will end up saving Jesus, and that it's written in the stars, is true because it was written in the stars. And if you want a photograph of it happening, it's still there today. This idea of Bethlehem and so on that they had hooked up from the Old Testament to try to attach the New Testament to it, which ends up falling apart too. But ooh, as a word, is hooked up to a lot of things. It's going to be hooked up to the house of bread in Bethlehem. And so there are many connections that are showing you this is how this all worked out. It's that simple, people. Like trying to show you that, well, whenever you thought that I still had the quarter in my hand and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, I don't even no longer have a quarter in my hand. We're just going through gestures here, and there is no quarter. Like a Zeppelin song, no quarter. Wordplay in the constellations, cuneiform titles, and part of the action and details taking place in each stellar tableau, or each photography picture, or pictures of all the dots that are in there. And it's the same thing that they used to end up becoming this narrative that they have that's going on. Luke's story tells of a pregnant virgin, a child swaddled lying in a manger, angel of the Lord, there were shepherds, multitude of a heavenly army, by the way, that are there. Well, the angels are also written in the stars too. It's right there, and people can see so. So these depictions that are showing you here, Orion was looked at as a shepherd too. This is why you get the same idea that the ancient Sumerian idea of Tammuz or Dumuzi is a shepherd and so on. But they try to take that out of the situation. You know, Jesus was a carpenter, right? He was a tecton, so that took it out in left field. And it took just enough of the story perhaps where people didn't realize that that's what that hooks up to. But then shepherds end up tending their flocks by night and got visited by angels, the army of heaven. God in his wooden scale, Libra, Dingir, Gish, and Aaron, as they look at it here, shows God, the heavenly sky of wood, scale in the army. So that's why those depictions are put in his story there, and they aren't in the actual other story. That's why John McHugh says that they must have not used the same one for each one. Well, they actually used the same one, but different